Thanks for joining us for another episode of Life Sciences and Biotech CEO Stories. Today, we actually have two guests. Charles DeCoster IV is the CEO, and Tony Watson is the COO of Xenocor, a company that is focused on revolutionizing laparoscopic surgery with a new scope that they call Saberscope, which is dramatically less expensive, more effective in terms of providing the surgeon with available light and that sort of thing, and safer for the patient. Charles is an experienced CEO of many different industries, ranging from alternative energy to defense and travel. But he's an experienced fellow that has been brought in to shepherd the company through its sales process. And he's a graduate of Grand Valley State with a master's in accounting. Tony's background includes 16 years marketing experience with medical device companies, including Medtronic and Covidien, US Surgical, an important name in this space. And prior to joining Xenocor, Tony most recently introduced a product and created a new market, for the startup company TTC Med. Tony earned his BS at St. Cloud State and an MBA in medical device industry from Carlson School of Business at the University of Minnesota. So I understand, fellas, that the idea for Saberscope, like so many, particularly medical device innovations, came from kind of an aha moment that involved the light from an iPhone. The founder, Dr. Langell, was called out to surgery. And maybe you can share with us what happened there.
Yeah, I'll take that if that's all right, Charles. Thanks for having us, Tim. Really appreciate it. So this story is one that I'm fairly familiar with. I've known Dr. Langell for a while, long before I joined the company. I knew this was going on in the background, but didn't know a lot at the time. I had a different job. But I do know that he was on call. He opened up his phone and was trying not to wake his wife in the middle of the night. And that bright light in his eyes reminded him of when staff members or another surgeon might accidentally point the camera across the room and saw how bright it was. And that made him realize, wait a minute, there's everything we really need to be able to see well in surgery right here in my pocket. Why haven't we made this change? And coincidentally, he was leading the Center for Medical Innovation at the University of Utah, where he was an attending surgeon, which, if you don't know, is kind of like where they put new ideas together with engineering students, medical students, residents, doctors. And he was already in charge of that. And so he was able to immediately kind of put that idea into action. And here we are now about 7 years later with a Gen 2 product about to hit the market. So he was on to something ahead of its time in many ways, but also just right at that time, so much consumer tech was driving great optics down to smaller portable sizes. That led to med device being able to follow, which we're not the only ones. We're just the only ones in laparoscopy, so minimally invasive abdominal and thoracic surgery. We're the only ones that are high definition. And so we're really first to market in this space, but the others are kind of on this same wave because of that growth in consumer tech, which is clearly much higher volume than med device. So that's enabled us to do things at a lower cost and more quickly than we would have if we just built it completely from the ground up.
So Dr. Langell was frustrated with kind of the current state of laparoscopic surgery. Mm-hmm. So he founded the company. What's broken about current laparoscopic surgery methods?
Yeah, I think I'll take a couple of those, and I'm sure Tony's going to add in here. But a colleague and myself were just at the ASMBS, which is the Institute for Bariatric Surgeons, and that conference in Vegas last week really did prove that frustration is a very prominent word in this space. Currently, because of the reusable nature of the devices and also the older technology platform, again, laparoscopic surgery was invented in the 80s. And so we're talking about a 35-year-old technology platform. that arguably has not changed dramatically since then. And so, what we're able to do with this single use model is eliminate a lot of the frustration. So you open up the package and you plug it in. That's the whole workflow. If you were to see the whole workflow that a reusable scope has to go through from the time it's opened in the ER till the time it gets back to the ER to be used again, it's insane. And something Tony says often that I really agree with is, if we were inventing how you do laparoscopic surgery today, there's no way it would be, the way everybody's doing it for the 4.5 million procedures in the US today. And so, by making it single use, not only are we simplifying, we're also providing a lot of visualization benefits. We're reducing waste. We talked a little bit about it. I'm sure we'll talk more about the economics and how that better serves hospitals. And so it really is a customer-centered design that is meant to address the major problems that are in laparoscopy that are not isolated. These aren't small incidents. These are things that, the dying from 1,000 paper cuts, it happens to every surgeon every day. And it's challenging. And so, we believe that is one of the reasons why we're getting such great relationships with folks who are so excited to use this product. And Tony can talk more, especially about, the benefits of the device itself and, how it will help during surgeries.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. And quick correction, just for the record, Charles said ER by mistake. We were just talking about some ER applications recently. Operating
sorry.
is the primary use case and setting, just to clarify. But then he hinted at something that I think is on a lot of people's minds when they see single use anything outside of med device or within it. They think about the waste profile and the impact to the environment. And Charles and I are both outdoors people and just care about our world and our kids' futures and all those things. And that's why we actually worked with a partner to devise a recycling program. So this is one is worth just kind of clarifying a little deeper on. Traditional scopes, you're using a bunch of wraps, wipes, PPE, chemicals, water that becomes wastewater into the system with those chemicals to clean this equipment. And 10 to 20% of the time, it doesn't get used on a patient. It has to get cleaned again, either because the packaging was compromised, sat too long, or it just was the wrong one and didn't get used. So in that scenario with our product, it's highly unlikely because with expensive, sterile single-use devices, they don't just open everything. They only open the things they know they're going to need. So when they know they need ours, they'll open it and it gets used. Well, when that happens, the whole device goes into a recycling bin. And about the same amount of space in a garbage bag it takes to clean one scope can hold about 30 to 40 of ours that get sent off at no charge to the customer, not even the shipping. We cover it all and eat that cost just to make it that much better of an impact versus wasting all that water and trash that a current setup actually uses. So people think reusable, they think better for the environment. It's not always exactly true.
Okay. So let's get into some specifics about what makes Saberscope the best solution.
I'll start with that, but Charles, we always add color to each other's comments, so I'll let him chime in as well, of course. But what customers find to be most beneficial more and more, as Charles already hinted at the word frustration. That encompasses a lot of things. So the few things is hassles, just dealing with the variability of the equipment, all these parts, all the setup, whether it's maybe a year-old light cord and a brand new scope, or everything's 5 years old, gets handed to the surgeon, they don't like the image they see. So that's part of it. We eliminate that. You plug it in, it works. Brand new scope every time, right? The other piece is there's only one other scope on the market that articulates. So otherwise you have to have a bunch of different cut glass, beveled glass rods encased in metal that go to these different camera systems and to get different angles and to see really well in the abdomen. Ours will articulate up to 90 degrees with one device. So you don't have to take your eyes off the patient. We all know how distractions impact your ability to do a task very well or on time. This eliminates some of those distractions and pauses and interruptions. Another one is fog. So traditional scopes, they can get really hot, but actually at the very, very tip of the glass rod, they tend to be cool. So the cold CO2 used to insufflate the belly, coupled with the warm, moist abdomen inside the patient, results in condensation or fog on the tip of the scope. obscuring the view. So regardless of how new or old or great your equipment is or not great, you can't see. For a lot of procedures, you have to pause to try to reduce fogging by warming, wiping the tip, things like that.
What is it about Saberscope? How were you able to do that?
Our light is actually adjacent to the lens, so it acts as a built-in scope warmer. Traditional scopes, they put in a warm saline bath or in some other device that helps warm it to get ready to be used. And if it stays warm long enough, you don't have fog. But guess what? Eventually, that cold CO2 coming into the abdomen cools it, causes condensation. Then you have this ongoing cycle, just like your scuba mask or snorkel mask. Once it starts fogging, it's kind of hard to make it stop, and it keeps coming up. And so it's interruption, delay in surgery, time under anesthesia. So we can potentially address a good portion of that. And the second obscuration of vision is fog. In addition to fog, is smoke and steam. And that comes from cautery, electrocautery, and or vessel sealers and dissectors that create smoke or steam plume inside the abdomen, just like driving through a snowstorm or fog. We operate on a different wavelength and intensity of light, allows you to see better. You get less bounce back of those kind of floating little particles and molecules that you would normally see.
Interesting. Okay. So can we get into maybe a little bit more about the cost to the system in terms of patient issues and in terms of economics of the current laparoscopic environment?
Yeah, so I'll kick that off. And I think once you look at the fact that everyone uses the same kind of technology for these laparoscopic procedures today, there are three major players: Stryker, Olympus, and Karl Storz. And they're all, this xenon light with fiber optic light cable. They're all reusable. And they all suffer from the same challenges, but the economics are all capital-based models, meaning that you buy the capital and you hope that you can use it as much as possible. Just like most businesses, right? You're trying to get as much throughput as you can to leverage that capital greater. And what we have found in almost all of the instances where we've spoken with hospitals of different sizes and types is that they tend to be underutilizing that capital relative to our disposable model, meaning that they're not putting enough procedures through what was a very large capital purchase. And so when you compare our single-use model, which is aligned with how much they use, perfectly aligned because they literally pay for it per use, we are allowed to do a lot of different things that I think then help the hospitals address what they specifically need in their specific center, rather than this kind of catch-all, kind of classic model, which is, give us a lot of money for this capital equipment, and then it's your responsibility to use it as much as you can. And so, we're at a place where as, surgeons use this device and they find out how much they really do enjoy it versus the traditional method, it is then easier for them to sell that into their leadership and administration because it is also at better economic alignment. It reduces waste, it reduces hassles, right? It reduces downtime, all of these great things. And so when you wrap all those economic points together, we're really coming out on top in just about every case.
Yeah, and to add to that real quickly is there's other costs that are kind of hidden or not accounted for very well because just like any big organization, hospitals aren't immune to this, is that they have a lot of different budgets and departments and goals. And so you have a biomed and repair departments. That's one cost. You have a maintenance agreement you have to pay for these to even get some of the parts. You can't buy them from some other, like Napa auto parts for your car. There's no such thing. You got to buy the maintenance plan. And then you have repairs, many of which are not covered by the maintenance plan. And then you have the stuff that just breaks or even walks away. We've talked to many accounts where, the underpaid, overworked staff and sterile processing starts to walk off with a few things to make a few extra bucks. And so they have a number of ways that you're spending on this current equipment that isn't always captured in a cohesive way where the hospital even knows what they're paying per procedure. We find from a paper that we had published, it's over $1,000 on average per use of the reusable equipment that they think they're getting, this great value from. And I think a lot of people's perception is, oh, it's cost a couple $100,000 and I use the heck out of it for the last number of years. It's like, well, maybe in the one busy room. What about the other 10 rooms? What about all that walking off equipment? What about the broken, all that stuff? It's never captured very well by a typical health system or hospital.
What does it cost a hospital just to get into the current laparoscopic business?
About 125 at a minimum, and as high as almost 300,000. If you attach it to the ceiling, that's another 200,000. So up to almost 500,000 day one out the door.
And that's per room.
Yeah, and that's per room.
To attach to the ceiling, huh?
Yeah, and you got to have backups on backups. You got to have usually 3 to 5 setups per room of the cameras, light cord, scopes. So you put all that together, and it's a very expensive proposition day one, which is one of the biggest reasons, surgery centers have not taken on laparoscopy as much as we would have probably predicted 10 years ago. It's just that upfront cost is just too much to take the risk. Like, will we do the volume to ever make up for this thing?
Mhm.
That question mark goes away with us. You pay for what you use.
Okay. I saw somewhere that there were as many as like 400 deaths a year from.
Yeah, it's related to thermal bowel injuries. There's 2 primary causes of that.
Like $1 million a piece.
Yes. Yeah. So the cost, not to mention obviously the human life, but there's a big cost. It's fairly rare when you think about it in the sense of over 4.5 million procedures done minimally invasively. That's a low number, right? When we look at things statistically, it's like, oh, it's really low risk. But why take that risk if you don't have to? And one of the big reasons those happen is what's called an arc injury. So when you activate electrocautery, you're essentially using electricity. Monopolar cautery converts it to an energy that's going to cauterize tissue and stop bleeding, helps with cutting and coagulating. But that's energy that needs to find a home, right? It's not bipolar, it's monopolar. So it's shooting through the body and dispersing to then go to a grounding pad that's stuck to the patient. Well, if you put a lightning rod, meaning a big glass and metal encased scope, right next to that source of energy, where does the energy want to go? To the lightning rod really close by, or through that, mostly water body down to the grounding pad? It's anybody's guess. And most of the time it finds the grounding pad, thank goodness. But the tendency is if it's close enough at enough intensity for enough time, that energy can jump to the glass rod encased in metal. And then any adjacent structures are subject to the amount of energy trying to find then a new home and keep moving. And what that ends up being is a full thickness bowel burn out of the field of view. Wow. Meaning surgeon and staff doesn't even know they just injured this patient in a significant way. And bowel moves during the procedure, right? You position the patient, peristalsis, which is the wave movement of the bowel trying to move, food and contents through. And if they don't see it, that patient goes home, gets discharged. If it's a same day surgery, a few days later, they get a fever. And they're like, I don't feel so good. What's going on? If they're the type that doesn't want to call the doctor right away, it might be too late. If they call them right away, they know, oh, you probably have a potential infection leading to sepsis. You're going to die if you don't get in here for a reoperation. And that's where those deaths come from. The doctors know how to manage it when they know what it is, not pointing fingers. It's just one of those things that they won't always know it's there. And a good portion of those 400 or so deaths on average per year is from that type of injury. So very rare, but super serious and very hard to catch it.
Wow. Do you know what's the growth rate of laparoscopic surgery versus normal traditional surgery? Do you know?
The device market specific to the space is about 7 to 8% CAGR right now. And then the single-use scope space in particular overall is about 20%. But we saw a recent report that's showing as high as 39% CAGR through 2028.
Wow. But the implication from what you're saying to me, outsider, is that the number of laparoscopic surgeries may be held back versus traditional because hospitals are reticent to make the upfront investment.
For sure. In other markets in particular, in the US, it's a cost they've just been willing to bear. They've had to eat it and find a way to do it. And there was no other model. All the companies price things pretty close. but we're still only 20% penetrated 35 years in to this technology being available, it becoming the standard of care for most of us here in the US and what we expect whenever it's, anatomically and procedurally feasible. But the rest of the world, for the most part, does not have it. Europe, Japan, Australia, and major centers throughout the world have it, but the rest don't. So you're talking billions of patients right now still getting treated with big incisions, long recovery times. And the biggest gating item is the cost of this equipment. Training is part of it, but that's not all. Many people train all over the world and go back to their home market, in a rural or further out type of a town, work at their hospital. There's no way they're ever going to have that equipment at the price that
But
it's at.
that's one of the really exciting things about the Saberscope, because it's so small. It could be on a battlefield, but not on the field, but in the field hospital.
Yeah,
It could be, in the jungle in Kenya,
that's right.
that sort of thing. It could
Exactly.
make laparoscopic surgery available in areas where it thus far hasn't been.
That's right. More people, more places. At the conference, Charles just referenced Luis Rodriguez, who's our leader in the South for sales. He was asking surgeons to meet with him that he knew, and they're like, "Oh, where's your booth?" He's like, "Oh, we don't need a booth. I have the whole lap tower in my pocket." Or I think he said in my bag, but they're like, "What, really?" And when they see it, everyone always like, "Whoa, that's it." They're like, in a good way, like, "Oh, it's that simple." It kind of blows them away. And we just had a call with our military contracting partner, and there's definitely opportunities there. There's opportunities in the developing world and rural and underserved markets, even here in the US, that don't have as good of access to such equipment. Even a surgeon who travels and goes to multiple facilities could take it with them. A private practice surgeon going to a rural or a Native American healthcare facility, something like that, where they may not always have the funding and have the equipment, they could bring it with them. You need a monitor, you need a few other things, but there's a lot of it they could actually just walk right in the door with.
Right. Which is something that to me is so exciting about the tech that's happening in the life sciences, because it's going to expand access, not just here in the US, where we already have, pretty good access, but across the world to, emerging markets, places where traditional healthcare just doesn't exist.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say, Tim, that we probably get an email at least once a week from somebody outside of the United States that would love to start using, our product. And as we scale, our central focus right now is proving this in the US. We've already got kind of our high relationship, high touch sites that we're starting with. But we are very excited for the time when we can eventually, spread things and start driving, like we're talking about, just utilization and more procedures, right, in more places. This is the standard of care, right? And so when you're talking about doing minimally invasive surgery, anybody who's getting surgery would prefer to have that. Again, like Tony's saying, if it's feasible. And so, we would love to be a part of making that happen globally.
Right. Yeah. So one thing I'd like to go back to is that I noted in just researching for the podcast that Dr. Langell, after he had his aha moment, he went to other surgeons and said, "What's been your experience? What do you think we need to do?" He worked backwards. Once he found the problem, he worked backwards to develop a comprehensive solution. And now 7 years later, here we are. So let's talk about those 7 years. Tell us about the challenges that you've experienced during that period in terms of design and then manufacture. And then we can talk more about building the sales team and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'll take a couple quick first comments just because of my history, and then Charles has more of the manufacturing side of things more currently. But I'd say some of the bigger challenges early on were raising money. It's always a challenge. We're starting out, even before my time, but they got seed money, got it going, got the project, found the right, intelligent person. We have a MIT PhD who's worked on some of the world's first digital cameras, who's helped us with this tech all along the way and was a co-founder. And so we got to a kind of an MVP 10 millimeter scope. So in minimally invasive surgery, smaller is better. And so we started with 10 millimeters, which is great, but 5 has become more and more of the standards. People want the ability to use a 5 millimeter port, smaller incision. You don't have to suture that close. So it's actually a little bit easier for the surgeon and staff, faster procedure, patient gets less of a scar, all those reasons. And so everybody prefers smaller. And so as we got out, got voice of the customer, did some procedures throughout the world and in the US, we got the resounding feedback that 5 millimeter was desired. Well, when you shrink the outer diameter by 50%, the inner diameter shrinks by even more than 50%. So designing that is a tremendous challenge to keep it HD, give it all the features we want, make it robust enough, but not too expensive. And so there's a lot of those things that go into it, and that's leading us to where we are now, which does present some challenges in scalability. But this product is being made currently. And so I hand it off to Charles there to just talk a little bit more about kind of where we're at and where we're headed to continue to address those kinds of challenges.
Okay.
Yeah, so with a single-use device, right, it's pretty easy to see how quickly, you need to be able to ramp your manufacturing. And to Tony's point, and all of this innovation, it's a fairly complex device. And so being able to make that at scale has been something, that we've spent a lot of time and effort and energy in. I think the other thing that's important is, we need to make sure that as we're delivering this new technology, this new device, that we're not asking surgeons to give things up. And so when you think about the quality of the image and making sure that, right, the new scope that we put in everybody's hands, that it functions as intended, and then to scale that up, you can imagine, right, all of those things coming together is very challenging. And so, what we've taken really is just from a design perspective, customer-centric approach, and then from a manufacturing perspective, a manufacturing approach. And, we work with a really good contract manufacturer who has a lot of experience in this field, works with, all the big names in medical device. And so, understands the needs, and, just a smart and diverse group of people to help us solve problems. I would say, for Tony and I, that's a prerequisite, with anybody who we interview for any position in the organization, having that problem solving mindset, and being willing to venture out of your comfort zone because that you know how to get stuff done. And so we just try to continuously encourage that in our culture, is even though these are big, tough problems, we're smart people and we all get hired for a reason. So it's our job to make it happen.
So where are you manufacturing here in the US or in Asia? What?
So our manufacturing is actually in Central America and Costa Rica.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's you get to, I think, avert a little bit of the challenges that some US companies are experiencing with China. And I know a ton of stuff gets made there, and it's for good reason. But for us, we can't have disruptions, in our product flow, for any reason, right? Patients are at stake here. And so, we had to have a really good, straightforward supply chain that made sense. And Costa Rica, I don't know if you've ever been, but it's just a great place, to have a business full of just great, really smart people. So really happy with what we're doing there.
And really nice sailfish.
Yeah. Right. And waves. Yeah. If you're a surfer, I love it.
Yeah.
And Tim, you had asked about sales as well, from a, kind of hiring and scaling perspective, I believe. Is that right? You wanted to know?
Yeah.
So our challenge there is back to just really the scaling of the manufacturing. And I wouldn't say it's a big challenge. It's just a hurdle we have to continue to run towards and jump over and through, is to know how many can we make, how fast. Right now, I can sell as many as we can possibly make, to be honest.
So how many can you make? No day.
You're muted, Charles.
No, really, how many do you think you could
So
make?
yeah, so the general forecast, right, or expectation is, in the first year here, we're kind of in that, 2000 or so for the year. Year two, we're looking at somewhere in the range of, 8,000 plus, and then year three, 20,000 plus. Even up to potentially 40,000. Some of it's going to depend on, our next generation devices clearly going to be more easily manufacturable because you learn a lot of things right on your first rodeo as you launch, and that's one of the things that I'm really thankful for. The foundations of this platform and the digital and dynamic nature of it just make it so much easier to iterate, to get to the next one, to launch a new product into a market that's what we need. And so, the scaling there, right, going from 2,000 in a year to 20,000 in a year over the course of just 3 years. I mean, we're going to be doing that with a lot of strong partners, people we've identified, and ultimately, it's we believe that we will still likely be undersupplied at that point because basically every surgeon we've ever put this in their hands wants to try it, and we generally speaking have had very awesome relationships and conversations with the administrative people who are making sure that it makes economic in every other sense. And so we feel very good about not only our ability to scale but also our ability to satisfy what we believe is a very real customer need.
That's great. Wow. I mean, that's really big growth.
Yeah.
But you mentioned early on that there were others who either currently manufactured a disposable product or were in the process of. This is where the industry's going. So there are, my guess is, others who are, I don't want to say nipping at your heels, but potential future competitors. Can you tell us about those and why you think you've bettered their
Sure.
their products?
Sure. Yeah, so a couple just quick pieces. The first one is that we would bifurcate this market into those who have laparoscopy and a laparoscope. Those are all traditional. There is not a single use laparoscope in the market, with the exception of our device. And then there are the people who make a lot of single use scopes, but are not in laparoscopic surgery. And those scopes are scopes from people like Ambu, Boston Scientific. They make duodenoscopes and bronchoscopes and ureteroscopes. And there's a lot of scopes and endoscopy that is separate from the laparoscopic market that we're going after. And both Ambu and Boston Scientific, who are experts in single-use scope, neither of them play in our operating room world at all. In terms of laparoscopy, they really don't have any business lines associated with that. And so, when you look at people who are trying to enter this type of a field in a market, not only do we have strong IP that can help protect us from people coming straight behind us in the same way that we are. If you think about it, the Bostons and the Ambus likely aren't headed down this road just because they'd have to spin up a whole new sales force. Right. And if you look at the people who are in this world, if you look at the Strykers, the Olympuses, the Karl Storrs, I mean, I led strategy and investor relations for Stryker. I know how those businesses work. And just at the end of the day, Stryker is very good at a certain kind of innovation, which is not these types of very disruptive innovations that innovate their sales model and their economics. That's something they usually wait until somebody has gone out into the market and proved it, and then they go out and try to acquire it. The kind of last group of people who always have the potential to come up is other disruptors like Tony and I, right, who know how to do this thing and are out here in the space. And again, I think I would just throw that back to RIP, where we've got a really strong portfolio where we believe it will be very challenging for someone to follow us. And if they do, it will then again be unlikely for them to be able to offer the same value at the same economics.
Interesting. And my sense of it is, both from your deck, okay, as well as from the comment that Charles just made, is that at some point you might expect someone like a Stryker to come along and say, bigger might be better.
Yeah, I think it's fair that is the traditional route, right, of these things. But Tony and I, like we always talk about with the board, you build for the long term, regardless of what your strategy is. And so, where we're at as an organization is we know that there's going to be significant interest in our device once it's proven. And so we do think about how do you prove something like this? How do you have the right data points and how do you have the right relationships and how can you show that to somebody in a provable way? And so we think about that with all the things that we do. And if you're going from our relatively small sales force against the Strikers of the world and their 500 people laparoscopic sales force, it's makes sense for them to scale by purchasing new technology rather than necessarily Tony and I building another 400 300 person sales force. So those are decisions that are made a little bit down the road. Once you've been in the market, you see what kind of interest there is, and candidly, just how strongly of a foundation of a company Tony and I are able to build. If we don't build this for the long term, then we would really be looking to sell. And so, it's on us to make sure that these things happen. And, that's one of the reasons I'm so thankful to have Tony on board, because apart from just having been a tremendous sales leader for so long, just leadership and operations and all of these things that are important, he's just so good at it, and it makes us all better.
Right. So let's talk about some of those relationships for a minute, because I know that you have a relationship with the university hospitals. You've done kind of extensive work in terms of relative value with them, and that has kind of demonstrated some of the performance for you. So can you tell us a little bit about that relationship and how it's growing and how it came to be, all that sort of thing?
Well, to clarify, we're working with multiple, academic institutions. UH Cleveland, if that's what you're referencing, is one of them.
My father was born there.
Yeah. Oh, wow. We've done a number of labs and animal labs and dry demos and things like that as a form of validation. So the relationships vary from institution to institution. Some just see it as this is innovative. We want to learn more about it and help you and give you some feedback. Some are like, hey, you got to pay us to use our lab, but we'll help get some people in there. Everybody does it a little bit differently, but the universal result from any of these has been every surgeon who uses it signs a form and says they want to try it. They've given us feedback. We're talking 8s or 9s out of 10s of their likelihood to adopt if it were available in their institution. 8s, 9s, and 10s, and their ability to do surgery safely after just a few minutes in an animal lab. They feel like they could do surgery safely with it. So we've kind of shortened that adoption curve and received that feedback. So we've done labs at Cleveland Clinic as well. Another one in Ohio, Wake Forest. We've done a few.
Boston.
Boston at Tufts. And so we've been in a bunch of places, different specialties. We're not, we have a few that we believe are our focus, but the truth will be in the purchasing patterns and usage patterns, who's really adopting this. But we know who everyone likes it. Every specialty that does laparoscopy out of these events has shown us they have at least one use case for it that is somewhat regular, and many of which we believe will expand upon that once they have it in their hands.
And those are all important names.
Yeah.
Those are important hospitals.
Yeah.
So are you actually out there day to day now trying to sell the Saberscope, or?
In a sense, carefully, because we want to stay focused on those. Those are obviously important places.
Right.
We don't want to outpace our supply, for one, and two, engagement by the customer is critical. So they're a little bit self-selecting. if we have to chase them and chase them and chase them, that's not our best first customer, right? We want people who see the promise of this for the long term. And we're not trying to be everywhere at once because one, if we are to sell the business, it's not as attractive to be in 10 accounts 1 day a week or one account for 10 cases a day. That's
Right.
showing the model is much more like, boom, we can make this really, really big and scalable. That's what we're trying to prove, as well as that's just a better business foundation. We don't have to hire as many people, travel as much. So whether that's a long-term business structure or acquisition structure, either way, it's smarter to stay focused.
Right. Right.
And it drives execution if we can stay focused. So that's really what we're doing right now is those some of those names I mentioned and a few others. And so we're actively working with those. So an example is our sales leaders are actually going into these accounts now, training staff, observing procedures, making notes of how everything connects, meeting with the biomed department, make sure our equipment plays nicely, which it does so far everywhere we go, but also just seeing all the extra steps and waste and things that are going on and the delays so that when we go into our live cases really soon here, it's going to be very obvious, like, hey, remember all those things we saw before? Now you don't have to deal with that. It'll just continue to reinforce why they're interested in this device. So we're really setting the stage right now as we lead up to launch and focused on those key accounts only.
Great. Great. And I think you currently have 4 salespeople involved.
Well, 3 plus me,
Okay.
plus a marketer who will be in the field a bit as well.
Okay. Great. You've got a great team in addition to yourselves. I noticed that Dinesh Patel, who's pretty much of a legend, is on the. And can you maybe tell us a little bit about how that larger team came together, and maybe a little something about how you all work together, what the relationships are?
I'll jump in on a little bit. The board, a lot of that was formed before either of us really. So what I do know is a lot of it's just through some of the Utah entrepreneurial and med device and biotech network that exists is where a lot of it came from, is people just knowing, hey, this is probably the right kind of person to have involved, and as they were forming it, as these things kind of tend to be. But some of the additions since to our board have been from, significant investment, gaining a board seat, as well as Mark Foster is the CEO of Trice Medical, which is a extremity single-use scope. So for hand and foot procedures, he's the CEO of that company. So he knows the space very well, but very far away from being competitive. And so our previous CEO, who's a friend of Charles and mine, helped to find him and bring him in through a mutual connection. And he's been a great addition to our board. So that's kind of how that came together. And then a lot of our team is, luckily, because we've been in the industry so long, we've both stayed in touch and have a lot of people we know and trust that we've seen their work. We've seen what they do when no one's looking, and we know that they can get things done and we can count on them. And the culture is amazing. The people we get to work with, it's such an honor, honestly, every day. And why now I work even harder, because I don't want to ever let them down. I have personal friends who've invested. Now I have people who I highly respect in the industry that I won't let down. And we always had the patient first ahead of all that. And so now it's like every day I'm motivated and excited to do my work, because there's too many people that rely on me, but in a good way. I see that as like, it's my responsibility. Go out and execute now and do your work today.
Good.
Yeah, and having worked in the places Tony and I have, I mean, there's just a lot of good people out there, and just like Tony said, I mean, keeping relationships is really an important part of this business. I mean, med device is small, and so getting out there and making sure you're putting the right foot forward on a regular basis, I think, is kind of good advice for anyone entering this field. Because you're going to end up running into the people you run into again. And I think that's another thing, like Tony had mentioned, with patient-centered focus. I mean, it's just such a rewarding place to be, and so we're a very fortunate company that we get to build our culture now from the ground up. I mean, with any corporate entity, which Tony and I were very close to the top of both. You see a lot of the skeletons in the closet too, and a lot of the dysfunction that it has to exist in corporate America, because it's complex, amalgamation of a bunch of different humans with diverse perspectives. you know, and in our case, we fortunately get to, you know, kind of build our culture with the people that we invite to come in. And, you know, I think Tony and I have said this a lot of times. I mean, we wouldn't hire anybody that we wouldn't trust to get their work done when we weren't there. So
Yeah, and you mentioned who we choose, but it's also who chooses us. Seeing
yeah.
proactivity and the reach outs and people. I mean, I've had 3 just today of people who've been in touch with me for months who are constantly like, "You ready to hire me yet? Can you officially interview me yet?" And seeing that desire, knowing that they're getting into I won't say messy because we're organized, we do our jobs, but it's messy, right? Early on, storming, forming, norming, just like when new groups come together. It's the same with a new business. You kind of get to that next tier, and they're like, "Oh, now we have big kid problems." Next tier, now we have adult problems, whatever you want to call it, and it's just problems to be solved, and you got to be comfortable with that. And we love that. We thrive on that, and that's business. That's running a company, starting it from small and raising money and the takeoff from there. But we got to have people who are ready for that and showing that they're seeking that and not just want a cool job because say, "Hey, I work at a startup." That's not good enough. You got to show me what you belong here.
You actually have to work at the
Yeah, except to work. There's no hiding. We don't have a single conference call where you can just sit and listen.
Yeah,
Like, if
right,
you're on that call, it's for a reason, and you better be a part of it.
right.
The big companies, there's so many of those where you got to be on. They take attendance, but you don't want to pay attention because you got 10 other things to do, and you're not actually able to add value. We want people to be able to feel like they can add value, but we also obviously need to add value to them, develop them, give them opportunities to learn, stretch, do new things. And that's a big part of how we kind of pick who gets to work here, but they pick us too.
So we talked about the 400 people that get burned every year. That's $1 million a case. We've talked about site infections and the cost there, that sort of thing. So I would think that the insurers would be knocking down your door.
They would, except the process kind of works through Medicare typically, or CMS, I should clarify. And we've explored that a bit. The burden of proof and clinical data is so high that by the time we get to where we have enough that they're going to care, because it's not just about cost, right? It's got to be outcomes and really focus. And because these are rare enough events, we got to have enough usage to show that we solve for enough of that to matter. That's going to take years, to be honest. Unfortunately, it's just the way they look at it. So by the time we get to that point, even if we're gathering that data all the while, chances of us being on the market as Xenocor and not gobbled up are pretty slim, to be honest, especially if we're on that path. If we are proving it, it's looking good and we're getting thousands and thousands of these used and paid for, it's going to be hard to ignore us in the market, especially as a first mover that's way ahead of anybody else right now.
And how will you collect all that data?
Right now, we have some surveys planned, more initial like marketing related pieces, but we're talking to some of those academics. That's the other advantage to these institutions we're working with is they have interest in doing research, and we're vetting out how could we do these kinds of things. What things would drive the most value for the organization, and that's where we really need to land. And that may not be a part of anything we do, but it's something we're strongly considering. But I think some of the things that are more immediate, easier, shorter term will probably come up first as far as studies and white papers and bench studies, things like that, that will just make it that much easier for people to say, this is safe, this is great, let's adopt it. And let's reimburse for it maybe someday, those kinds of things. That can still come from a lot of those other pieces we're working on. But patient data, that's a whole complex thing that we're probably not quite outfitted for yet.
Well, it sounds like you're really at the end of the beginning journey.
Right.
And now is, I always like to quote President Kennedy used to say, sincerity is always subject to proof. So we'll see how it goes.
Yep.
But I'm excited for Xenocor. And more importantly, I'm excited for patients, not just here in the US, but in lesser developed areas, for instance, Costa Rica, where they'll now be able to access laparoscopic, minimally invasive surgery. in a more plentiful way. So it's quite a journey you're on, and I'm excited for you and for the rest of the world. Thank you very much for your time today, Charles and Tony. I've enjoyed getting to know more about you and more about Xenocor and Saberscope. And good luck. I hope that we can follow up sometime in the future to hear about your success.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for tuning in to the Life Sciences and Biotech podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. The information contained in this website and podcast are purely informational and not considered investment recommendations. Tim Doherty's participation in Biotech Insights is separate and apart from his role as an investment advisor representative. Nothing contained herein can be construed as a recommendation or endorsement of any of the companies discussed. Tim Doherty also has no financial affiliation with any of the companies mentioned in this communication. Tim Doherty makes no representation that the information contained in this material is accurate and is under no obligation to update this information as changes occur.